Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for coming to Navigating New Norms, Retailer Requirements for Biodiversity and Pest Management, which is a joint presentation of Measure to Improve and SES Global Services. Jumping in, let's do quick introductions. Kieran, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So thanks for having me here today, Kevin. My name is Kieran Picken-McNeese. I am the Director of Sustainability Programs at Measure to Improve. And I've been with Measure to Improve for some 7 years working in the produce industry.
Excellent. I'm Kevin Warner. I am Director of ESG Certifications and Strategy at SES Global Services, which is sort of the long title for I head up our sustainable ag programs. And I've been at SES for 6 years in a month. So been here for a while, running a number of different programs.
Just a quick note on Measure to Improve for anybody who's not familiar. MTI was founded in 2014 by a 4th generation daughter in a farming family, and we are committed to serving the fresh produce industry. So if you grow, pack, ship, or work in an industry association for fresh produce, you are the sorts of folks that we want to know. When it comes to how we think about sustainability, we believe that sustainability has to include a good business case, in addition to the great benefits to both the environment and to the people who work in our communities and work in our organizations. As the name suggests, we really emphasize measuring and improving, and then being able to credibly promote your sustainability efforts. And that can cover a lot of different kinds of topics. We start with organizations all the way at the beginning of their sustainability journey, trying to figure out what should our sustainability strategy even be? Where should we get started? We might work on projects like zero waste, on projects like regenerative agriculture and soil health. And sometimes we work on projects around third-party certifications. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today.
And then SES Global Services has been around for 40 years. We're in our 40th year this year, and we started doing pesticide residue testing in California agriculture in the 80s and have grown quite a bit over the years to we now work in forestry and fisheries and greenhouse gas emissions, and we have operations in 125 countries across, I don't even know, 130 or 140 different program offerings. Within our food and ag division, we cover all sorts of, I guess the whole gamut of training and consulting, food safety audits, labeling programs like gluten-free or non-GMO or organic, and then a whole host of sustainable agriculture programs. So our conversation today is really looking at the state of play in retailer requirements for farms and growing operations for brands selling into the US market. This is a quickly shifting space where certifications are becoming sort of a cost of doing business, and it's hard to keep track of what works for which retailers and all of that. So we're going to just kind of go through a number of certifications that we offer, talk about what the benefits of each individual one is, and give some guidance on what it looks like to implement an integrated pest management program and address biodiversity topics. Kieran, you want to add anything to this one?
No, I think the key takeaway for some of the folks who might be on the call is that today, if you are thinking about how you are going to meet upcoming IPM or pollinator health or biodiversity requirements or other kinds of sustainability requirements from your retailer, start thinking about who those retailers are, because we're going to go through a few of them later and talk about what kinds of things they're asking for. And so you might be able to narrow in on some of which audits might better suit your organization from the conversation today.
So Kieran, what is pest management? What is integrated pest management?
What is integrated pest management? What a good question. We are seeing a lot of different kinds of definitions for integrated pest management or IPM. There's lots of different language that's going with this. People are talking about pollinator health. They're talking about bees. this is at its base level about how we make decisions and document them on farms, that we can both address the kinds of pest pressure that organizations are facing in a way that makes sense for our agricultural operations, while also minimizing some of the negative externalities and outcomes associated with that. So we need to be able to control our pest populations while maintaining yield, while complying with applicable laws in different jurisdictions. And often we take all of that, and while most growers are doing many of these things, they may not be writing it down. And so this is one of the key shifts here that we're seeing in IPM, is that we need to be able to document the decisions that we're making, the practices that we have in place, even when they're practices we've had in place for a long time or that feel really standard. Of course, you're going out and scouting. That's great. We got to write that down. We need to make sure that we're documenting that in a way that is now auditable and really incorporated into some kind of comprehensive plan or program.
I think it's really encouraging for growers too that this isn't new. It might be different how we address it, but integrated pest management has been around for decades, and it shouldn't be too intimidating. Part of the shift, though, is retailers are starting to require it. And Walmart really started this conversation a few years ago when they laid out a timeline for all producers in their food and floral supply chains meeting some very specific integrated pest management requirements through a basket of approved certifications. And it matters because Walmart sells 30% of US groceries. They sway the market. So they set these targets, and now we're seeing a number of other retailers get into it as well. And so one that's not listed here that we'll talk about later is Southern Grocers, which has some regional brands like Winn-Dixie. So they don't have a hard timeline yet. They've sort of in their policy listed, a preference on sourcing from a number of the programs we'll discuss today, but they don't have a deadline yet.
Yeah, another good reminder here too is that IPM is just one aspect of what you're probably being asked for when it comes to sustainability. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later. Cisco has some requirements. It's not a specific IPM requirement the way that some of these are, but there's lots of other retailers out there as well with their own set of requirements and portals and surveys. So keep that in mind as we run through that. You may have some other names on your short list that you want to make sure you're considering the needs of.
And there's other topics, like you say, social compliance, food safety. Some retailers have sort of, I would say, like pet sustainability topics. Aldi really cares about water in high stress regions, right? They're looking at that for 2030 goals. So it's a moving target. Today we're mostly talking about integrated pest management. Do you want to talk about this one a little bit?
Sure. So this comes back to that question of what is IPM and how do we talk about it? How do we document it? Documentation really becomes one of the key elements of this. We are talking about how we make decisions on farm about pest control. When we decide to use a biological control, when we use a chemical control, when we use other kinds of non-chemical intervention, what is our monitoring, our identification practices? How do we document all of these things? And how do we summarize it all in something that we can use for reference, that we can both document our practices and learn over time? So that really becomes your IPM management plan. And that management plan can feel really technical, right? We're thinking about it and going, gosh, what if I don't have one of those? You probably have a set of resources that are serving this role already. They just might not all be in one place. You might have scouting reports or logs. You might have a resource from the University of California's IPM program, and you're using that to help you understand at what point do I need to spray for this particular pest? When is it right to make an intervention? And when might we be okay? When is the actual cost of action not worth the benefit that I'm going to get? Because we all know that these inputs are very expensive in some cases. And so when we think about your program, it's both the decisions that you're making all the time for how to manage your crop and manage pests around your crop, as well as how we document those things and the resources that help us make those decisions.
And your regulatory environment sort of impacts where you are on this too, right? If you're in California, there's more regulations being implemented than other parts of the US or other parts of the world. So that can be a shortcut too. You're already doing this work. It's just more of an issue of documenting it. So a third party like SCS can come in and make an assessment, right?
Exactly.
But
And when you think about a place like California, you're also working with a pest control advisor, right? A PCA. They're part of your IPM program, and they're a great resource for understanding what kinds of recommendations they're making, why they're making them, where this information comes from. And so you probably have a relationship with at least one other person who is helping you make these kinds of decisions. And so that is also part of your program.
So today we're going to talk about a handful of standards that SCS offers, and this is sort of pulled from the baskets that the retailers have picked. There are other programs that aren't listed here that SCS doesn't offer that could be a good option too, but at least for me, I'm not educated enough to speak to them. Some of them are sort of, niche too, or where they're like Flor Verde is mostly a South American cut flower program. It's a good standard, but it's maybe not as relevant for U.S. growers, right? So that's sort of we're trying to keep it simplified as much as possible. But so we're going to go through each of these standards and talk about the benefits, what they do, and why you might consider adopting them. So Be Better. Be Better is an interesting one in that it's the only one on our list that is pollinator focused. It's what it does, and it does it really well. It seems to be better fit for permanent crops because it has requirements around permanent pollinator habitat that in some cropping systems can be really hard, right? If you're in Salinas and your cost of land is really high, it's really hard to dedicate permanent land to pollinator habitat, but it's doable, and we are seeing growers do it. But a lot of blueberries, a lot of almonds, it's sort of in that space. It's not just an assurance program, it also is a very strong consumer facing eco label, right? So it's a useful one for product differentiation, and we'll talk about this a bit more later, but like broadly, this list of certifications can be divided into assurance programs that are just B2B, and then assurance plus product differentiation, which come with eco labels. Be Better is a good one. It's got some pricing for the use of the mark, but the audits themselves are pretty affordable. It's only on site every 3 years. Unless there's a major change to your operation, the surveillance audits can be done remotely, and it's very doable. It's a good choice. Anything to add there, Karen?
Yeah, I think coming back to our notes at the beginning, this is a great standard around IPM and around pollinators specifically. If you have other pressures from retailers around water or labor, you have to meet those requirements separately. So this is a great standard for what it does, but it's not a broad standard. It's very focused on pollinator health. And so that may or may not be the right choice for your organization based on your needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. So next, Equitable Food Initiative. This is a unique one in that it does a bit of everything. It meets retailer requirements on social compliance, on food safety, on pesticide issues, integrated pest management. It is a large program, and it's rigorous, right? In order to do all of that, it's 2 auditors, usually for 3 days. So it's 6 auditing days. So it's a big investment, and it's hard. It's a great program as a one-stop shop. And one of the challenges as you are navigating all these different retailer demands is you can end up with half a dozen certifications and audits every year. And so this program really streamlines things, which is appealing for a lot of bigger operations that end up with audit fatigue, where you're just doing audits all year long. It does require pre-audit training of staff. It requires, I would say, a pretty robust quality management system and QA team to implement effectively. And so at least with our clients, they tend to be larger operations or connected with bigger brands that are getting a lot of value here. And one retailer we're not talking about today too much is Costco, which is one of the biggest in the United States. They help develop EFI and they really favor it. So if, again, this is where as an organization, you have to bring in your salespeople and your business development people with Costco and to Whole Foods. EFI might be a really good choice.
This is another one of those standards that is consumer facing in addition to that B2B assurance that you talked about, Kevin. So this is another one where if you are able to put this on a label, there may be some additional benefit and some additional recognition that you get from consumers. But the challenge is you have to get enough of that product across the supply chain. So it's not something you're going to do in one place and necessarily be able to leverage. So it's a little bit more of an undertaking, but it can be a valuable undertaking if you have the time to do it well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think Costco and Whole Foods have both made commitments to pay a premium for EFI that goes to workers. So that's another element where it can be useful from a HR standpoint. That helps you with workforce development and maintenance. It's a wide-ranging program, but it's definitely one to look into if you're a larger operation targeting those specific retailers. So next is Fairtrade USA. This is a great consumer-facing label with a rigorous audit backing it up. It's got, a lot of consumer recognition. I think there's a connotation with, say, I don't know, like the tropical standards where it's coffee, it's cocoa, but at SCS we've seen huge growth in fair trade in the fresh produce space as well. Cut flowers, we have a lot of Mexican clients doing fair trade for the U.S. market, and more in the U.S. as well. We have real growth in the fair trade program because it does resonate with consumers. One thing to note is it's got continuous improvement built into the standard, and in order to meet, I think most of these retailer requirements, you have to get to that year 6 level, which you don't have to do it for 6 years to get to it. You could start there, but it's not something you just could do tomorrow and be done. It takes investment, it takes work, which is a hallmark of any high bar standard.
Exactly. And this, along with EFI, both have strong social elements. And that's probably the thing that if you know fair trade or you know EFI, you know them for their social programs, not for their IPM programs. But if you're trying to meet requirements for, we're not talking about social requirements really today, but Walmart's social requirements around sourcing and other retailers, these become, again, a way to address multiple concerns at the same time without needing to add additional audits again and again and again, and it can really help reduce that audit fatigue. But it's not the sort of thing that you're going to do on a dime. It's going to take time and preparation, and so you'll need to help prepare your growers, your supply chain to do this kind of work. It's a little bit of a bigger lift.
Mm-hmm. So the first of our, I would say, pure food safety audits. Global Gap was the only one originally included in the Walmart list. Others have been added since then, and so it's got, I think because of that, it's got recognition from some of the other retailers as well. If you're in farming, you probably know Global Gap already. It's one of the most popular food safety programs. It's at GFSI level, and I think it's a great one that it can adapt to farms of all sizes, right? You've got really small farms getting audited to Global Gap. You've got really large multi-site operations.
You have that group audit option too. So if you're really big and you've got a lot of different sites, you aren't necessarily facing all the same kinds of audit fatigue as in some other contexts.
Yeah, there's some efficiency there, which is really valuable. It also has a lot of modularity and more in the future. So it's got, if you're in a high risk area, it's got a spring add-on, which is a water standard. If you're you need some social compliance, but not at the same sort of like level of a Walmart is asking for, you can add on GRASP, which is a social compliance add-on. They're developing an environmental standard. They really are doing lots of different areas of agriculture, and we might talk about this a little bit later, but planning for the future, it's not just what's required in 2025, it's what do you have to do in 2030. Global Gap seems to be like they have their finger on the pulse of where the markets are going and are adding those different elements over time.
Well positioned. And then when you think again about the other retailers you might be facing, if you're selling into the European market, some of those additional add-ons can be really useful. The new add-ons that might be coming down the road, that can really be helpful. It's also important if you have a complicated supply chain, even if your long-term goal is to roll out a more comprehensive standard, one of these one-stop shop options that we've talked about and will talk about. It's nice to know what you can do in the near term, because if we think back to that first slide with the retailer requirements on it, Walmart's goals are for 2025. And so if you're still sitting here going, I'm not sure how we're going to meet this requirement, tying your IPM compliance to your food safety audit might be a really good way to get a good chunk of your supply chain moving in the near future, even if down the road you're going to pick something more comprehensive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And I know I've had sort of like sales conversations with some of the larger US brands that have hundreds, if not thousands, of independent suppliers, and they're trying to figure out how to roll out a sustainably grown or a Be Better, but they're not quite there yet. And it's having a Global Gap as a starting point is great. And really, it's going to get you to 2025 without having to totally shift how you do business.
Absolutely.
So Primus GFS, it's our second pure food safety audit. It recently got approved with their Module 9, which is some additional IPM requirement. It currently is only accepted by Walmart, but I would be willing to gamble that the other retailers will accept it as well. I'm confident Primus is in those conversations with retailers. So that I think it's a great option, especially if you're already doing Primus, which a lot of growers are. Super easy to get to 2025 and just do those extra requirements.
Absolutely. It can be part of your existing audit. And if you've already done your audit for the year, there are ways to sort of add it later. So this is something that they would surely be happy to talk to you about. Again, if your supply chain is already using Global Gap or Primus or SQF or some of these other audits, this becomes a really good way to, in the near term, meet some of these requirements while you take time to decide, is a more comprehensive audit right for our organization?
So Rainforest Alliance, this is another one sort of like fair trade, where I think the association is with coffee and chocolate and tea and bananas and some of those tropical commodities, but it's worth considering, I think, for US growers. We're starting to see more adoption, just largely because it's a rigorous program. It covers a lot of different environmental areas, and the frog is valuable, right? If you have a vertically integrated brand, this is a useful program that speaks to consumers. So it's I would say smaller in the North American context, but there's definitely I think it's got a good place, and we're starting to see more growers adopt it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one's expanded over time out of just that sort of like topics focused look, and so there's a lot more opportunity here than even just a few years ago people might have been thinking about. And it has great brand recognition. People know the frog, and maybe they know it from some other from chocolate, from coffee, but it's starting to crop up in other places too.
Rock. So we added this because it's worth talking about. Regenerative organic is a very hot program, I would say. It's growing really quickly. It's only been around for a few years now. It does require organic certification as a baseline, right? It's so you have to do that first, and that organic certification actually meets all of the requirements from the different retailers by itself. So you don't actually have to do rock, but it's getting a lot of traction. Big brands like Patagonia and Dr. Bronner's are adopting it, and Whole Foods really likes it for on-package claims around regenerative topics. So this is one where, you know, it's not going to be applicable to, you know, 99% of operations because they're not certified organic, but planning for the future, planning for 2030, trying to differentiate your brand, it's a useful one.
Absolutely. Regenerative is very buzzy, and the definitions from that are floating around. So you may be seeing the term regenerative used in contexts that do not require organic certification and in contexts where it does. So just good to know that that is a word that has a few different definitions and new ones cropping up all the time. Another good one to know about this particular certification are that there are also some social requirements. So if you're looking at a 2030 horizon or a longer horizon and going, we are organic or we're transitioning to organic, this could really speak to us. We're really interested in building things like soil health, as well as meeting these retailer requirements. Thinking too about the different requirements that go into this standard, because there are environmental requirements, there are also labor requirements, and then it's uncommon in the produce space, but it does happen occasionally. If you happen to have livestock integrated into this context, there are also requirements for that. So we see more of that in the non-produce, non-specialty crop side, but when you open up that standard, you'll see there's a section about livestock too. So if you don't have livestock, you can set that one aside, but you're not required to have them to reach this certification.
So the next one is SQF, Safe Quality Food. Kieran, you Measure to Improve worked with them to develop this protocol. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. It's another one of these moments where people recognize that there's already an auditor coming to your operation who could help you meet these IPM requirements. And so this has another add-on, like we talked about with Primus. It's not embedded the way that Global Gap is. So if you're doing Global Gap, that regular standard, I think if it's 5 point something, you're meeting the requirement. For SQF, it has an additional addendum or add-on that you can use, but if you're already using this particular standard, it will meet the requirements for Walmart. It's very new, and so like the Primus Module 9, it may be picked up by other retailers as well, but it came out this year. And so if you are using SQF, you may not even have seen this come out just yet. And so do reach out to your auditing team, see about adding it, see if it can be useful for you.
I'll just add, SQF it has hundreds of farms certified under the program, but it really, I think that its bread and butter is in processing, manufacturing, and that's where the bulk of their certificates are. And so this is a great one if you're an operation that has both. And we see that with a lot of the tree fruit growers in Washington State. They like SQF because it's got different scopes for different parts of their operation. It's got group certification. So it's I think it's you know, geared towards larger multi-scope operations, but really great that you can have it as an add-on and meet your IPM requirements without having to do a whole other program.
Absolutely.
So this is our baby. This is Sustainably Grown, which SCS created 15 years ago. And it's a really high bar sustainability program that looks at a wide range, pretty much every topic in environmental stewardship and social responsibility. And that's why it's gotten, you know, adopted or approved by a number of retailers. It's got a lot of traction in Europe as well. A number of retailers accepted there. I think it's a hard audit. It's work, and it's not something you're going to do just for assurance. It's really about differentiating your brand. And so we see a lot of, I would say, consumer-facing farm operations adopt it, where like Perry and Sons or Del Monte or Jack Vandenberg with their table grapes and mandarins, Pompeii and olive oil, sort of big consumer-facing brands that are farming companies at heart. And I think that's where why there's so much growth too, is those brands appreciate the differentiation, the labeling that comes with it, and it's a good fit for those sorts of operations. Karen, you want to add anything on? I know you've worked with sustainably grown with farmers in the past.
We have. We've worked with sustainably grown farmers, particularly in strawberries, and we will say that while it is a lift, right, it does take time to prepare. And so if you are able to leverage the brand piece of it, that could be really valuable. We've also seen growers learn a lot about their own operations. Anytime you're talking about a really comprehensive standard, it forces you to look at your operation differently, and it gives you this chance to learn, try new things, and sort of can encourage you to step a little bit outside your comfort zone, collect a little more data, do a little more analysis, try something new. And so even if you're not quite sure how this will work out yet, it's worth considering some of these more comprehensive standards, like sustainably grown, to see if they might be a good fit for your organization. Pick one grower who's on the cutting edge and who's always looking to try new things, who's in your supply chain. See how it goes. Do a little in-house assessment. See how close you are to achieving that goal, what other value it might provide to your organization.
Yeah, that's a model we've seen with a lot of growers. Pompeian certified their California olive operations as a pilot, and now they're rolling it out with more than 70,000 farms in Spain. And that's useful as a sort of a continuous improvement approach, an incremental approach that I think works with a number of these programs. It's especially the eco-label ones. Do consider doing a pilot, right? Try it out with one of the, maybe a better, one of your growers that's better performing or is a better fit, and see if it's something that you can replicate across your supply chain.
Everybody's got someone in their supply chain who's always trying something new, right? They've always got a new pilot, a new this, we're trying this variety, we're trying this practice. That's a great candidate for these kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So the sustainability standard from the Sustainable Food Group, this is a interesting one in that it was originally Cisco's in-house IPM program, Cisco, the food service company, for their processed goods, their canned goods, and they've rolled it out as a requirement for a number of fresh produce suppliers over the last couple of years, and they moved it to the Sustainable Food Group to manage. So it's being audited by a number of certification bodies. It sits in the Azul system, so it pairs really well with Primus, but we are seeing it added on with Global Gap as well. So if you're selling to Cisco, you have to do it. It's useful because it also meets all these retailer requirements, but it's purely an assurance program at this point. They don't have a label or consumer facing claim. I think that might change in the future. They might roll something out, but for now, it's purely a B2B thing.
Definitely. Yeah, it would be interesting to see how this one morphs over time. It's relatively new. It's not new, but some folks are encountering it for the first time in the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's become a have to for Cisco in a way that it was more voluntary to start. So yeah, we are seeing a lot of growers adopt it for that reason. So organic, I assume everyone here at least has a baseline understanding of it. It is a one to consider because it does meet all the requirements. It is integrated pest management is part of any organic program, and it's got legs. It's been around for a long time. There's a lot of support in getting certified. That being said, it's hard, right? It requires 3 years of transition. It's only 1 or 2% of acreage in the U.S. at this point, and that's not changed that much over the years. We're seeing a huge amount of growth in imports. So certified products at retail are increasing, right? They've gone from 6 to 7 to 8% over the recent years, and new requirements from the National Organic Program from the USDA has meant more supply chain actors have to get audits as well and get certified. And so there's a lot of growth in the program. It's not going away, but it's also one that, agronomically it has to work for the farming operation.
Yeah, it's if you aren't already organic, you're probably not going to use organic as your way to meet IPM requirements, right? 3-year transition and all of those other elements. If you are organic or a chunk of your supply chain is, you're already meeting these requirements. And so again, when thinking about how do we get our whole supply chain and dozens, maybe hundreds of growers certified in time for Walmart's deadline, how do we get them all through their audits? If you've got a chunk of your supply chain that's organic, they're good. They're meeting, I think, all of the major retailers' requirements at this point. That said, there are other reasons that people go organic. So probably you're not going to pick it for IPM purposes, but there are lots of good reasons to go that way.
And like you said, you can take advantage of it if you're already there. You're
absolutely.
You don't have to worry about the deadlines. So quickly, just to discuss, third-party certifications are becoming a norm, right? For retailer requirements, their sourcing expectations, you have to do them. And I think there's some value there where it is leveling the playing field, right? There's not a penalty for those first movers who are spending more money on audits and certifications, and there's other people dragging their feet not doing it. So there's some good, I would say, in the adoption by these retailers. And for a lot of larger operations too, audits help you find things that need addressing. And we see that with our programs all the time, where it's better for the audit to find something than for it to go to an NGO that finds out something, or the press, or whatever else. So having that assurance is a really valuable thing. You can just do assurance in a food safety program. You can do something more and differentiate your product through certifications in labeling programs that target consumers and bring transparency to your operation.
Absolutely. It fits into that same mindset around sustainability of continuous improvement. And some of the standards we talked about have continuous improvement built in. Others will grow over time, and your organization may grow and change over time. But having those sort of regular check-ins to say, okay, this is what the standard requires. Are we still meeting that? Are we exceeding it? If so, how? How do we want to communicate those things and document the practices that we have? Because when we come back to that IPM requirement at the end of the day, it needs to be audit ready, right? You're going to bring in an auditor, they're going to look at your records. You're going to need to be able to talk to them and show them the work that you're doing. And so all comes back to documentation. It's also a nice check when we're going to make any kind of sustainability related claim. These sorts of audits can help communicate the work that you're doing in a way that has that third-party stamp of approval. It's not easy to get the little sustainably grown logo. It's not easy to get an EFI logo or one of these other things on your product. And so when you've gone through that work and you've been able to take the time, it can really serve as an endorsement of your product in a way that a picture is worth 1,000 words, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this is sort of our end. I think I've worked with the Measure to Improve for almost 6 years now, and it's really great having partners in the industry that you can collaborate with and can help set up growers for success. All of this is hard to navigate. There's no one right answer, and require a lot of choices and buy-in. And it's great having organizations like Measure to Improve that will help you figure it out, where that SDS can step in and give you that assurance and the certification and the credibility you're looking for through these programs. We've got some questions, but Karen, do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to add?
I think the only thing I'd add here is that there really is no one size fits all, right? We went through a lot of standards. You may have another standard in mind and you're going like, wait, that wasn't even on the list of certifications or audits that you went through. There's a lot of them out there, and figuring out which one is right for your organization is not a trivial task, And so figuring that out is something you can do internally with your teams. You need to bring together a lot of stakeholders to make that happen. And it's also something that somebody like Measure to Improve or your contact at SCS can help you sort through.
Great. So we have a couple of questions. One clarification or comment regarding the SQF addendum. It's approved by Walmart, similar to Primus GFS. SQF is having conversations with all retailers for approval of the SQF IPM sustainability addendum, and it also has a multi-site option. So yeah, I think I have no doubt that it will be approved by other retailers by the time these timelines have to be met, right? These deadlines hit. And a good point on the multi-site as well. That's part of the value of SQF, is it can be adopted by larger grower groups. Another question: how do I start? What's the best certification? Karen, you want to answer that?
Yeah, you start by figuring out what audits you might already be doing, right? Go back, look and see, are we using SQF? Are we using Primus? Are we using Global Gap? What would we need to do in sort of the near term? If you're selling to Walmart, your target is 2025. Giant Eagle's target is 2025, which means while some of these bigger standards are really excellent and might be worth it in the long term, you'll also need to comply in the short term. And so you'll need to think about how you're going to do that for next year. So look at what you're already doing, see if it makes sense to work an addendum in, whether your growers have done that already or can do it going forward. And then start to think about, how is our structure? Could we benefit from one of these eco labels? Could we benefit from being able to put a seal on our product? Or do we sell into a supply chain where that's not going to make sense for us? Because whether you're going business to consumer, or you're selling directly to another business who might go on to label the product based on their own specifications, you might need something slightly different. However, even if you right now are thinking, oh, well, we just sell to other brands, talk to them about their aspirations. Could they help you get into another market? Are they interested in selling more fair trade product, more EFI certified product, more sustainably grown? See if there's ways to leverage the work that you're doing already and to partner with some of those other retailers and brands.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that, you can get preferential treatment with some of these programs, right? So even if you aren't engaging with the retailers directly, it might be your purchasers need fair trade or they need sustainably grown to access certain markets. Also, if you like we mentioned earlier, if you're selling to Costco, look at EFI. If you are selling to Whole Foods and you want to get preferential treatment, look at regenerative organic. There are market-based reasons to do it, right? It's not just people doing these programs out of the goodness of the heart. It's because it makes business sense.
The good business case. The last thing I think I'd add to that is consider whether you are also facing other kinds of sustainability requirements, specifically around labor, because that is another element of this, which we've touched on in a few places. Walmart has requirements, Costco has requirements, everybody's got labor requirements now. If you are being asked for an audit, you might already be doing the audit, you might be looking for one. See if there's ways to cross these lists and reduce the just sheer number of audits that you are going through and that your growers are going through.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, it's IPM is not in a vacuum. It's part of a broader set of requirements that everyone has to be addressing. Final question here. What comes next after IPM?
What comes next after IPM? What a question. This is the way sustainability has been going though, right, Kevin? This is just, IPM is the most recent requirement, but it wasn't the first one, and it's probably not the last one either. I would imagine we'll see the IPM requirements sort of shift over time a little bit. A lot of times these programs kind of grow and morph as they come into maturity. But the other two that seem like they're sort of buzzy right now are things around regenerative. So again, that's a term that's like still sort of being sorted out. It means some different things in some different circles. But some of the big retailers do have goals around land conservation, land restoration, soil health. And so there's definitely an opportunity to have some of that conversation, especially as the other topic we're seeing growing is the greenhouse gas conversation, right? And so there's interplay between regenerative and carbon. And again, many of these retailers have their own goals around carbon emissions and reductions and targets and reporting. So that's maybe the three punch there, is more IPM probably to come, regenerative, and more carbon.
Yeah, and data driven with all of that too, right? I think that's maybe a big part of it. I think also nothing will be fast, and that's encouraging, right? These deadlines were set out years ago. It's not like anyone's going to get surprised if you're paying attention. And a lot of retailers are rolling out requirements for first tier suppliers, and then it will work down to the farm level. And so we see that with social compliance. We see that with, greenhouse gas reporting. But none of this is going away, right? I don't see anyone backtracking, and it's only getting more rigorous. Luckily, that it's incremental, and I guess what final thought is like, there's no finish line here, right? You complete an audit, and you need to start working on next year's audit. You have to have continuous improvement built into your operation. That should make you more resilient, and what should make your operation stronger if you're doing it right. And it should be a benefit, but don't think that this will stop after 2025, which is not bad.
No, not at all. And again, look to your specific retailer mix and your the folks you do food service with. There are many sort of other organizations with requirements, and so they may have their, to use your word from before, they're sort of like pet issues, things that they care most about, that they really prioritized, and that may or may not line up with other retailers. So you got to take a look at your own specific set of requests.
All right, there is a post-webinar survey that you will get. We'd love to hear from you if you would like to talk to us. Karen and I are both available to chat on these topics. Karen, thank you so much for your time today. It's great having your expertise and your talent, and I appreciate you joining.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to be able to work with SCS over the last few years and help our clients find the right fit, the right audits, and to really be able to build out that continuous improvement pipeline and grow into their certifications over time.
Great. Thank you all for attending.
Have a good one.